Welcome everybody to the School of Theology. My name is Hannah Mattis. I'm the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs here at the school at the seminary. We are delighted to welcome to the School of Theology and to the Swanee community the Smithsonian team for Exploring Human Origins. What does it mean to be human? We're delighted to have a talk from Rick Potts today, this evening. If you've not yet visited the exhibit, please do. It will be on display until what?
May 15th.
May 15th. Thank you, Romulus. So it will be ongoing. So please do come visit. Look at the slides and look at the posters and what is on the exhibit. Rick will speak, and then at the end of the talk, we will welcome questions from the audience. So until then, a warm welcome to Rick Potts.
Thing to do is to avoid tripping and remember to project. So I will do that. If anyone has trouble hearing me, just wave both hands frantically and I will speak on. Okay, very good. Thanks so much for being here this evening. Our team from the Smithsonian is very grateful, very happy to be here tonight. I'm grateful for Hannah's introduction, and to the entire team from the university and the School of Theology here at the university for what I know is hard work and amazing work to bring the exhibit to the campus here. And as Hannah says, please enjoy the exhibit. It's also my pleasure tonight to introduce to you the traveling exhibit itself and then some of the main themes of the exhibit. The exhibit is on a national tour, and Sewanee is one of 6 seminaries that's part of our tour for over 3 years, from 2023 to the end of this year, 2026. And our group from the Smithsonian, and let me just introduce Jim Miller over there, and Brianna Pobener, and Lee Meadows, and the 4 of us will be part of a variety of events focused on tomorrow here at the seminary. And so we're grateful for that opportunity to interact with the students and members of the university, and of course the faculty of the seminary. As you may have gathered by now, if you've seen the exhibit or if you're just looking at the opening slide here, that the main theme of the exhibit is not an answer. It's a question, and it's quite a profound question, one that seeks out the whole variety of ways by which we and people everywhere try to understand ourselves and our humanity. And it's the question, what does it mean to be human? And it's a question that is also very profound, I think, in a theological context, and to be considered as part of theological training or just contemplation by anyone. The exhibit focuses on scientific discoveries unearthed from many parts of the world that draw a lot of public attention. These are findings that are based on fossils and archaeological digs, studies of genomics and genetics, and also understandings that come from studying of other organisms that live around us, living organisms. And so while the exhibit focuses on research findings, the starting point of the traveling exhibit is this much broader question than the science itself. And so what I'd like to do is to open up to hear for a few minutes your thoughts about that question, if you can keep it brief. But we'd love to hear some concise answers to that question. So we'll do that in a few moments. But let me just then, so if you could think about it, that would be great. Anything that you'd like to, well, almost anything you'd like to say. It is a question that is informed by many ways of understanding the world and our place in it. It's certainly informed by religious studies and understandings. It's informed by philosophy, literature, the arts in general. The question is informed by values and ethical principles that we learn while growing up. And it's informed by everyday experiences that even lie outside all those areas or that are in addition to those everyday experiences. And also it's informed, we think, by new discoveries and new studies that can enrich our insights about the world. The subject of human origins with us as a part of Earth's history, it should be also noted, can be a most challenging topic. It can be, for some people, a troubling topic, especially in some areas of theological concerns. All of us have heard and possibly have been part of the inheritance of society's conflicts about this topic, in society's conflicts from generations before us, that the findings of evolution and religious understandings must be opposed to one another. Well, the goal of our tour around the country and to come here to visit you and the programs associated with the exhibit is to nurture, with your help, to nurture an open and civil conversation about this profound and challenging subject. So, with that preamble, I hope you've been thinking, and I hope, please raise your hand if you have a nice, concise answer to that question. It's not an answer. There are no right answers, okay? There are only interesting responses. So who has an idea? What would anyone like to volunteer? Yes, please.
Well, I guess I'm wondering, what do you mean when you say human? Do you mean Homo sapiens, or do you mean all the other humans?
I think my entire career has been based around trying to answer that. So please go ahead.
But to me, I guess when I answer your question with a question, I mean, what I find really interesting about some of your scientific findings is to try to see, well, where are the commonalities across the various human species? And then what is distinctive about Homo sapiens compared to the other humans?
Right. Well, that's and your answer is an inquiry, a whole area of inquiry, which is really cool. And it does relate to, well, both what are the commonalities and the continuities that we might envision with other forms of life. We're a form of life. There are other forms of life around us. There are other forms in the past, and we'll be exploring some of those in this talk. But then also, well, okay, where do we draw the line about human uniqueness, human distinctiveness? It's a big question. Thank you for reiterating the question. I appreciate that. Please, yes.
To me, scientifically, that we're defined by our DNA, especially through the human genome.
Yeah, so defined by our DNA, and DNA, of course, it's not a blueprint for people, but it's a code. It's a code for putting the chemicals in our developing bodies to basically define some of the potentials of human beings. And so that's a distinctive part of us. Who else? Yes, please, sir.
There's the question of othering, which seems to be one of the things that are raised by this whole question. Who are humans and who are not?
Yes, I see.
And whatever else we think about what other humans are.
That's right. There's something pretty fundamental about identity, about our own identity, and our common humanity. So that's right. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, please. Yes, please.
The animal that knows it will die before it dies.
The animal that knows it will die before it dies. Yeah. That's a good one. That's a hard one to comment on because it seems so profound and obvious in some ways. I hope you put that in the sticky notes on the board. On the exhibit, there is an invitation to anyone to write a contribution that would stick, you put on a Post-it note, a sticky note that's this big. And all I can say is that we've had answers that are one word, like God, taxes, chocolate, love. And we have had what looked like entire PhD dissertations written on a Post-it note. So please, we can continue on that. Anyone else? Just let me just take one more. Yes, please.
To be human is to ask the question, what does it mean to be human?
Well, thank you. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, that it is we have the sole capacity to ask questions pretty much of anything, but especially of such depth, and that connect with all things human. So great. Well, thank you very much for those contributions. And I would say that in addition, let's see if I can get this going here. I'm not very well practiced, I guess. You really have to mash this. There we go. Okay. Very good. Very good. Will this continue to work?
It should.
Okay. We'll figure it out as we go along. Okay. That's good. So I think it's in addition to my own and everyone else's personal reflections on that question. I think it's worth noting that we do truly live in an astonishing slice of history, where discoveries have changed and continue to challenge how we see ourselves. And what this refers to is space exploration as just one example. And space exploration has enabled us to see our home planet as a whole from outer space. Here, as it says there, a reconstruction from actual imagery of Earth. That's the bright dot, as you can see. As viewed from the Cassini spacecraft while passing Saturn about 1 billion miles away from the Earth. And our planet appears as if it were a small island, and yet it's clearly something that's part of cosmology. It's cosmological in its implications. There we go. And in this slice of history that we live in, research teams have mapped, and it's already been mentioned, the human genome. Have mapped the human genome, which serves as a way of understanding it is the way of understanding our genetic code passed from past to future generations. And here we see in this sort of cartoony version, maps illustrating that the genome of all humans is rooted in Africa. The human genome first diversified in Africa, and here we're talking about Homo sapiens, but also going further back in time, based on the fossil record, that Africa is where we find the earliest fossils of human ancestors, human predecessors. And then populations spread within and beyond the African continent. And this occurred so recently in evolutionary terms that, and shown in the bottom right corner there, that if you take any two people from the nearest to the farthest distance that you can, any living people, there's only about 1/10 of 1% genetic variation between the two persons. And in this is really dramatic, isn't it? Whoops.
You have to give it, hard mash.
A hard mash, okay. Let's see if we follow instructions. And also within recent decades, and this brings us to the topic of the night and of the exhibit, we've seen an incredibly rapid rise in discoveries pertaining to the long ago ancestry of humans, allowing us to peer deep into the past to explore where we came from. We see evidence of the long-term accumulation of human qualities, and these are just a few of the artifacts and discoveries at the bottom there. The oldest known footprints, bipedal, two-legged walking footprints with toes and arch and feet, very similar to human beings today. 3 individuals actually walking along. One was walking in the footprints of the other, not just 2 individuals. This dated back, this is from northern Tanzania, a find made by the famous paleoanthropologist, Dr. Mary Leakey and her team, dating back to about, not Mary, but the footprints, dated back to about 3.6, 3.7 million years ago. And so what we then see above that is an arc of just 5 skulls, 5 crania, that represent about 2.5 million years of changes in brain size and the size or brain case size and the size of the face, with 2.5 over a million years ago over on the left, a fossil from southern Africa, and an arc representing various members of our evolutionary group, the genus Homo, and with Homo sapiens in the lower right. Homo sapiens is the only species, only mammal, in fact, that has its face largely tucked in under the front of the brain case. And all the other fossil humans have the face, in a sense, hafted on to the front of the brain case, as opposed to ours, which is more vertical. And our skulls, our brain cases have a more globular shape to them than the other ones or previous predecessors of Homo sapiens. And then we have about 2.5 million years in the upper left of artifacts from the earliest known technology, known as Oldowan technology, to hand axes and then fishing implements that are dated to about 70 to 90,000 years ago. And then we have a couple of items in the upper right related to something I'll talk about later, which is the development of art, the use of color, pigments, such as that one lump up there that has a facet on it. It's known as an ochre crayon. It's dated to about 265,000 years ago. It doesn't look much like a Crayola crayon, wouldn't fit into a box of 64, but nonetheless, it has facets on it. This shows that it was used and rubbed as pigment. And then a piece from Zimbabwe that is a representation of, it looks like some aspects of it that are dog-like or lion-like, and some that are perhaps human-like, that you can be seen in a close-up of it, dated to about 25,000 to 40,000 years ago of representational art. There we go. A quick,
Yes.
okay, a quick mash.
Yes.
Not a sour mash.
Yes.
Okay, I know what country I'm in. So what I'd like to do tonight is to explore 3 what I think are remarkable aspects of our humanity, things that may, if we had gone on with the matter, the question of what does it mean to be human, some of you may have thought of. And these short vignettes arise from recent research discoveries. And these discoveries, I think you'll see, offer some intriguing ways to think about our human qualities, and you'll see aspects of these in the exhibit itself. So sharing and caring, growing up, and brains and parenting, and then innovations in early technology and social networking. Victories are small sometimes. So I have felt really very fortunate to be part of this exploration. This is a site with a hard to pronounce name. The name is Olorgesailie in southern Kenya. And this has been right up there where that arrow is, my home away from home for most of the last 40 years when I've been out there during the summertime. And people ask me, is that a good time to go to dig in this part of the world? And I always say, yes, I really am interested in getting out of a Washington, D.C. summer. Very, very humid, but it's also the dry season in Kenya. And so it's a great time to be digging there. And I thought when I started my first surveys there, when I moved to the Smithsonian in 1985, that I'd spend maybe 3 years, 4 years working at this site. Now we're in our fourth decade. And what you can see here are these layers, layer upon layer, in the foreground going back, of sediments where each of those layers, part of the last 1 million years of time represented at this site, 1 million years of time. And in between those, well, the layers represent each one a slight change or sometimes a large change in environment. Sometimes where a lake was present, then the lake disappears, a floodplain develops, rivers move across that, then there's soil that develops over the whole area, the lake comes back and so forth. And then every once in a while, there are volcanic eruptions that have radioactive materials in it, which can be dated in a clock-like way. And so that's how we know the amount of time that's been represented here. So in the investigation of this site has involved the question of how early ancestors responded and changed in their ever-changing surroundings over the past 1 million years. And we've done hundreds of excavations over the years in this particular place of Olorgesailie. And what I'd like to show you is just one interesting example. This is an excavation. You can see the measuring device where every object that we find gets lifted, gets excavated and bagged and gets measured in very precisely. Excavation in some ways is a way of destroying a site if you're not careful. So we have to record everything in great and meticulous detail. I'm generally known by our Kenyan crew as the secretary because I write everything down. And even though I do like to dig on occasion. And so this particular example is an elephant butchery site. These are the bones of an ancient form of elephant in sediments that date back to about 1 million years before the present, almost exactly 1 million years ago, based on dates that come from below and above the layer in which the elephant was found. You can see perhaps in the foreground there some sort of rugged looking thing. Those are the teeth of the elephant. It's an extinct form of elephant. It's no longer present on Earth. It's more closely related actually to the Indian elephant than it is to the present day African elephant, but it dominated in this area of Africa for a long period of time. And it was surrounded by more than 2,300 stone tools, including sharp flakes. We have evidence, microscopic evidence of the butchery on the ribs and the vertebrae, even the bone to which the tongue muscles attach in us and as well as in an elephant, the hyoid bone. So the early humans were really going after this amazing amount of meat and bone marrow and fatty tissue, which would have been very nutritious. You can see perhaps in the side wall there that there is this brown layer, which is what the elephant was in, and you can look at the chemicals in that soil and tell the proportion of trees and grass in this area, in this part of the world, that was on that landscape, but the elephant actually saw that the early humans lived in. And so from all of these clues, lots of clues, and more than what I've just mentioned, we can reconstruct kind of what we might call a memory of an event around 1 million years ago, where we see what we think the early humans looked like based on fossil bones from many parts of Africa at this time period, and the kinds of stone tools that were used at this time. And it was a swampy kind of area with mostly grass, very few trees. The stone tool material came from the mountain that you see there, Mount Olorgesailie, it's called now. And so this kind of a way of understanding these periods of time, these great depths of time, require this way that I've already mentioned, ways of knowing time depth. Field work is absolutely essential to this kind of work. We're geologists. Most of the people who work with me are geologists and people who are experts in chemistry and geophysics. Many different sciences come together to work in this area. And you can see a couple of the geologists there, or three of them, I guess. And these trenches that we dig to understand and document the sediment layers through time. And here we have ages of 672,000 at the base of the trench, 609,000 at the top. Scientists have many precise and reliable tests to date the specimens back millions of years. There are about 14 to 15 now, I would count, different methods based on chemistry and physics and geology that help us figure out this long period of time. Those tests can measure, as I mentioned, the radioactive decay of chemical elements, one element into another. Some of the methods count the electrons that are trapped inside of rocks and of fossils, which is dependent upon time. There's also the ability to compare minerals or magnetic particles in sediments with shifts in Earth's magnetic field, which are well dated all across the world, going way back in time. And there's increasingly the ability to compute the rate of genetic change. Of course, you can do that in living organisms, but there's also an increasing amount of DNA that's been able to be gotten from fossil bones back to about 400,000 years ago. Not really far back, but pretty far back. And the rate of genetic changes that occurred between them can be used to also study time. This work is an international exploration. It's an effort by researchers from all over the world, from many different nations, different cultural backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, different languages, but with translators. And so it's been an incredibly great privilege to be part of these scientific teams and to help lead them. And scientific research is a way of communicating findings about the world, such as in this area of science, across those diverse life experiences and perspectives. It's hard for me to say this, but this is my office at the Smithsonian. When all the books were removed from the bookshelves, this is right before the opening of the permanent exhibit hall at the Smithsonian, the Hall of Human Origins. And a very, very close friend of mine, great photographer, decided to move all the books and put all the specimens before they were going to go on exhibit on the shelves. These aren't all of them; these are just some of them. And we've done our best to try to recreate in flat panels some of this evidence in the traveling exhibit as well. And so, from the work of these research teams from all around the world, this interesting body of clues has developed, and they are ways of translating the tangible discoveries into, and again, I'll use that word, into, in a sense, a memory. A memory of a way of, in a sense, honoring these species before our own, a way of recognizing an inheritance that belongs to everyone. So the fossilized bones are living, objects where the living tissue, bones where the living tissue of bone is replaced by minerals from the groundwater. There are well more than 6,000 individuals known from the past 6 million years, which is about what you would expect for a large, our body-sized mammal going back in the fossil record. But in addition to that, there are archaeological sites, tens of thousands of stone artifacts that basically the early humans didn't do this intentionally, but it's like, well, we were here. And they help to indicate where early humans were living across the not only Africa, but Europe and Asia, and then eventually the entire world. And the tools tell us what the stone artifacts, the archaeological sites tell us what tools were made, what were used, and they tell us some of the activities that those early humans engaged in. There's also evidence of hearths and shelters, hearths, and we also see here in the front part of the table there some of the symbolic evidence, pigments and statues and paintings that also inform the early history of our own species, Homo sapiens. There are also animal bones that show butchery marks, tell us about the origin and development of meat eating. Stone tools can also tell us about changes in diet and in behavior. And there are new discoveries in this field all the time. There are many ways of studying the past, including the environments of the past. And we find that every record of the past shows that there were tremendous shifts in environment during the period of human origin spanning the last 6 or 7 million years ago. And here's a timeline from 7 million years ago to the present. And there is a zigzag curve, I guess it's called, but zigzag line that records from studies of the oxygen, the isotopes, the forms of oxygen in small organisms from the deep sea, foraminifera, forams they're called. And from that oxygen measure, we can tell how much glacial ice and essentially what the temperature of the Earth was over time. And so what we can see is that there is an overall trend. There's been an overall trend toward cooling, but there's also been an overall trend toward a high degree of variation in environment. Overall, on the right-hand side, up at the very top, is a projection to about the beginning of the next century, which is indications of warmer than anything our species has experienced. In fact, our ancestors experienced back to about 3 million years before the present. So it could have been that when the idea of evolutionary change was first contemplated, it might have been the case that Earth has been stable and unchanging throughout its history, however long you might see that history. But instead, this has been the last 6 million years to 7 million years, has been one of the most dramatic periods of change in Earth's history between wet and dry, and also between warm and cold. Wet and dry in the tropical areas near the equator, and warm and cold in the higher latitudes. And so as the conditions of life change with shifts in food and water and shelter that can be found in different places, it makes sense that adaptations, changes in ways of life and in anatomy of the body, were able to come about in distinct, what we call gene pools, populations, distinguishing one population from another, and eventually distinguishing species from one another. Previous ways of life sometimes became untenable and went extinct as environments changed, while other variations, novel ways of life, proved to be beneficial. And so such discoveries and research findings enable us to put all of the fossils and archaeological discoveries together, and what we see is a series of adaptations having emerged over time. This just showing the past 1 million years of certain key benchmarks in our evolutionary history. So we have the most rapid increase in relative brain size, the size of the brain relative to the size of the body, actually over the last 1 million years, between 1 million and 200,000, controlling fire and shelters. I'll talk about that a little bit later, exchanging resources over long distances, and then the emergence of a whole variety of innovations and cultures around the world. And so the brain size is an interesting one to think about, that there were brain size increases previous to that, but they were almost always accompanied by increases in body size also. This is the brain size increasing with the body size staying relatively the same or even decreasing in size. And then taking it back to, say, 6 million years ago, where we have fossil evidence that you can see a variety of the markers along the way. Again, time on the left and the adaptations or innovations on the right. Bipedal walking was coupled with climbing of trees, adaptations for both for a long period of time. But then there was more specialized walking just on 2 legs without so much tree climbing. An increase in the diet based on scratches on the teeth and their diversity, where food particles were creating grooves and pits in the teeth. Simple stone flaking. We've now shown that this goes back to 2.8 million years ago. Some of our discoveries over the last few years by our research team in Kenya. Extensive carrying of stones and food, prolonged elongation of the legs, some initial advances in technology before later ones. And if you want to see where our species comes into play here in the fossil record, it's about 300,000 years ago. And so what this means is with this marker is that many qualities that are characteristic of people today are actually ones that we have inherited from earlier ancestors, earlier species. So the exhibit is an invitation to explore these and other milestones that make up the ancient roots of the human species. Essential to exploring the exhibit is the relationship that we humans have, with all other organisms. It's with the primates, the biological group primates, where humans connect to the history of life on Earth. And we share some pretty interesting similarities here. The picture at the top is a chimpanzee. Chimpanzees are our closest, and bonobos are our closest living genetic relatives. Greatest degree of similarity, which you can perhaps see there, but you can explore in the exhibit, in the proteins, in a limited part, but the proteins that can be studied, the parts of DNA that give us proteins and build the body and its capacities, about a 1.2% difference in genetically. Not very much. But when all humans compare with all humans, that 99.9% genetically similar. And chimpanzees, just as an example here, that shows a chimpanzee mom showing two of her offspring, an older and an infant, how to use a hammerstone to crack nuts on an anvil. This is in Western Africa. It takes about 2 years for a chimpanzee to learn how to do this. Otherwise, the nuts go flying off in all sorts of directions and nothing really happens. But after about 2 years, the aim becomes good. And so, again, these matters of tool users, of complex social relationships, of social learners, just some of the examples of the similarities that we should be proud of rather than embarrassed by with regard to our being part of the group called the primates. So the basic idea is behind the investigation of human evolution is that there is a kinship among all organisms, and that there was change over time from what we call common ancestors that we shared that once lived long ago in the past. This connectedness among all forms of life, past and present, is, we have found as we've gone around the country, sometimes a little bit difficult for people to embrace. The idea that human beings are related to all primates, to all mammals, to all vertebrates, and yes, even to all plants, that we have a surprising degree of genetic similarity, largely because we're cellular organisms. In any case, this idea can be difficult for some, but for many people, this kinship among all organisms is truly, well, it's a source of wonder, and a significant thing to be aware of. So let us begin these 3 short vignettes with sharing and caring. And this illustrates one of my favorite examples of what does it mean to be human. And that is that when we get food, we don't eat it right away. At least I hardly ever sit down in the aisles of the supermarket. You know, if I were a chimpanzee, I probably would. But in any case, we don't eat it right away. Instead, we bring it to others, and we share it with family and friends, and even with people. Sometimes we don't even know we share the food with them. And so that, for some people, is really pretty an odd thing, an unusual thing about human beings. And yet it's something that we do, and it's something that we treasure. We can find evidence of this particular way of life, of sharing, deep in the past. In partnership with the National Museums of Kenya, Smithsonian excavations have unearthed evidence of the early change in stone technology, a technology that is made of stone, and also a change in diet. It's a very simple toolkit made out of hammer stones, things you hit with, cores, which are the things that are hit, and the flakes, the sharp slivers of stone that fly off. And they're hit in a particular pattern that makes use of the qualities of the rock that was found. And there is a change in diet that's been found from evidence of the animal bones that come from this site, and also evidence from the edges of stone tools, where there's evidence of digging up tubers out of the ground and specific kind of polish that's made from cleaning tubers of dirt on them. And there's also carrying of stones to make tools, and of food over long distances of up to 8 miles away, which was surprising when we found this. We can trace where the rock comes from all over the Rift Valley of Kenya, and see how far the rocks came from. And we also have animals that are represented there, the different kinds of animals that didn't live in the same habitat. So those were also brought. There was a delay of eating the food and brought to this particular place. And we see a number of these places dating to this time period. And so large changes in African environment, when you think of that, stone tools enable those predecessors of ours to adjust to what we might think of as a shifting menu of foods that resulted from different environments, different amounts of rainfall and drought. And that was an enormous advantage. And that then began our ancestral path to becoming reliant on technology. As I mentioned previously, we've found evidence of these stone tools now based on a paper published in 2023, 3 years ago, of the stone toolkit going back 2.8 million years ago. And you can see how simple the flake scars are on these, but there's a pattern into all of them to how they are struck. And they're found with 4 skeletons of hippopotamuses, which was hard to believe. It was a hippopotamus feast with cut marks on the bones. And we're still excavating this and trying to figure it out. We'll be going back this summer, the team, to do this. And so that's really pretty cool to see that old stone tools opened up a wealth of foods, in this case, hippopotamus butchery sites. So we strongly suspect that sharing of food was at the heart of this behavior. I mean, just think about 4 hippopotamus butchery sites. It's more food than any one individual could eat, or at least I hope so. So with the ability to make tools, make stone tools, and to carry and share food, there was this amazing ability of the members of well, ancestors of us to spread to other places within Africa, but also beyond the African continent. Now, they didn't have maps. They were just going over to see what was going on in the next valley and the next hillside and so on. And so, but eventually they moved across a very, very wide area. Probably the species known as Homo erectus, moving beyond the African, within and beyond the African continent in this particular time range by 2 billion years ago. One of the things I'd like to focus on, oh, and let me also point out, is that going across various climate and biotic zones from Indonesia up to northern China in the eastern part of this area was tremendous range of different environments that they had to adapt to. And even this basic stone toolkit helped to do this. One of the things I'd like to also point out is this site called Dmanisi up in the upper left, dated to about 1.8 million years ago to 1.85. I throw around these numbers very easily, so it's hard sometimes to encompass what I'm talking about, but a long time ago, okay, at the site of Dmanisi. And from the site of Dmanisi, there are 5 fossil skeletons of Homo erectus that have been found, and this is the skull of one of them. Well, what do you notice about this particular skull? Anything interesting, peculiar about it?
Teeth. Teeth.
Yeah, the teeth, the lack of teeth. And it's like the teeth just didn't fall out of the jaw. You can see that the bone has actually been resorbed. And forensic scientists looking at this say that this individual's teeth had fallen out probably about 5 to 7 years before the individual passed away. There's that much resorption of the bone. And so we know that the skeleton of this individual, that he was a man, so called the Old Man from Dmanisi in the Republic of Georgia, back to about 1.8 million years ago. And so I guess this brings up some interesting questions. And this could be the oldest instance in the prehistoric record of an individual that was taken care of for others for many years. And so could this old man indicate the roots of a sense of responsibility toward others, the beginning of something that for many of us is at the center, or at least part of the center of being human? Another example, much later in time, 50,000 years ago, but in a species different from ourselves than the so-called Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis, and a series of skeletons have been found in this cave, Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq. This particular individual in sediments dated back to about 50,000 years ago. And we see that a comparison of the individual's left and right upper arm bones, the humerus, okay? Well, the skull shows, again through x-rays, that around the age of about 8 years old, the individual received a blow to that fractured the left side of the skull in the area of near where the motor and frontal cortex is located. And the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. And it turns out that the right side of the body, not just the upper arm bone, but the entire right side of the body was withered. Okay, and this occurred when the individual was about 8. And based on microscopic studies of the blood vessels inside the bones of this individual, the individual lived to about 45 to 55 years of age. And so that's an incredibly long period of time. And so a sense of social living and care deep in our ancient history can arise from studies of the fossil record of our origin. Okay, so let me move on to the second vignette. The brain, babies, and parenting. And let's start off with the fact that something we all know, we have big brains. Homo sapiens has a big brain. And it's an important point to begin with that with such a remarkable development, there are not only advantages to having a large brain, you may be able to think of quite a number of them, but such adaptations also had costs or disadvantages. And this is one of the hallmarks of evolutionary change, that there are a combination of benefits, but also some disadvantages. And here we see an example of the benefits, stores decades of information, input and output of information and thought within seconds. But what do you think could be a disadvantage? Well, one of the disadvantages is that the brain is an energetically incredibly expensive organ. Okay, that newborns have big heads, which means there's difficulty in birth, and that growing up slowly had its dangers. Just think about the ancient environment of predators being in that same environment as the early humans. And so the dangers of growing up slowly. Let's talk about this for a moment. Gobbles up a lot of energy. Our brains in the average adult all around the world is about 2%, weighs about 2% of your body weight. Okay. But it takes up, even when resting, about 20% of your energy. Okay. Now I hope it's more than that right now for you. But it's, 2% versus 20%. And that's not a good deal as an organ goes. Okay. In infants who are growing their large brain, 80% of their metabolism, 80% of the energy they take in is just taken up by growing that large brain. Astonishing amount of energy that's put into that. So the body is quite immature for a long period of time, while the brain is growing. So it's not really that quickly. It gets to adult size around the age of 6. We know it doesn't get to maturity at the age of 6. But the brain is our organ of flexibility. It's crucial to life and survival in a changing world. And so evolving the capacity to grow a large brain, like that of other adaptations, certainly offered amazing benefits in a dynamic and uncertain world. They were beneficial in that sense. They were good, but they were not perfect. They had disadvantages as well. And here we can also note the connection between the first example that we did about sharing and caring, and the ability to share food and to eat nutritious foods within the group, within the population, made it possible to provide the fuel for babies and children to grow a large brain. Now, we all began as babies. Let's start with babies. And one thing we note about babies is that babies are fat. There's just no way around it. And it's a particular kind of fat. Let's call it baby fat. And it dominates babies' bodies. And it's not like adult fat, which comes to predominate in bodies of all adults everywhere. Metabolically, it's a different form of adipose tissue, fat tissue. Adult fat is excellent at storing energy, and keep storing it and keep storing it as you get older. Baby fat, on the other hand, is really good. It excels at burning energy, burning calories, and it's much more easily converted into energy. And it provides the fuel for our energetically very costly brain when you and I were infants. And so each of us took many, many years to grow up because it takes time to grow a large brain. And growing up depended upon parents, grandparents, sometimes siblings, sometimes the kindness of others who took care of us. And there are enormous efforts and time that go into parenting and nurturing. And that's a vital and universal aspect of being human. To put it briefly, human beings live life in the slow lane. We grow up slowly. And this is a comparison of the life stages in terms of growth, growing up, of a human being on average, and of our closest living biological relative, chimpanzees. And you can see that there is elongation, prolongation, including a significant childhood period that is not really represented or recognized in other primates. And we also have older adults who live well beyond the age of menopause for women, for example. We also have an unusual adolescent phase. And for better or for worse, yeah, it's not a great photo of an adolescent. Anyway, for better or for worse, we have this adolescent phase. And well, what do you think an adolescent phase is about? Remember, the brain is taking over all the energy of growing up. The body needs to catch up at some point, and that's adolescence, when there's often what's called a growth spurt, for some of us at least. That growth spurt is the body basically catching up because the brain is basically finished using up as much energy as it did when we were infants. Okay, so we have this life in the slow lane. And so brain, long time to grow, and it's energetically expensive. Growing up takes longer. Unique childhood and adolescent phases, and grandparents as well. And so I find it amazing that biologists have found a way to figure out when in the distant past, that this pace of growing up began to slow down. And first of all, our teeth start to grow while we are in the womb. And when the teeth erupt through the gums, the teeth, of course, stop growing. And they stop growing at certain years of age in our lives. And it turns out that the growth of our teeth is a reliable measure of how fast or how slowly it takes for the entire body to grow up. And so how can we figure this out? And I have to point out that it was a combination of people like myself, paleoanthropologists who study fossils, and dentists who figured this out. And because dentists have all sorts of interesting tools to look microscopically at teeth. And so using a high precision microscope, it's possible to count the number of days it takes for any given tooth that started to grow when in the womb, for any given tooth to finish growing and to erupt through the gums. And so again, this microscopic layer is showing layers of growth, these different layers of growth. Basically, one growth layer of enamel per 24 hours is laid down. Who knew? But the detailed studies have shown this not only across humans, but across all sorts of mammals as well. That is the case. So every 24 hours, a new layer is formed. And so basically what this means is that we have this internal timekeeper of tooth growth, one growth line each day, approximately. It's possible then to count the total number of days from birth to the completed growth and eruption of teeth. Okay, and this is how we know how long it takes to grow up, by counting the days of daily growth of the tooth enamel. But what else do we need to know? How can we tell the day of birth? How can we possibly tell that? Turns out our teeth contain a birth line. Birth is physiologically incredibly onerous to the body. And the enamel stops growing for a couple of days. And because of that, there's this dense line that can be seen in x-rays. And that is basically a birth certificate recorded inside of our teeth of the day that we were born. And we have a way to count the days from birth then to the layers of enamel going up to the edge of the tooth, to the final formation and erupting of the tooth through the gums. What's very, very cool about this particular picture is that this is a fossil ape from 20 million years ago. And we can actually see a record of the day it was born in its teeth, much as you see in living animals today. I find this mind-blowing. You know, hurrah for Denisols. It's really, really very, very cool. And so counting the time it took for teeth to erupt has also been analyzed in our more recent fossil ancestors, the bipeds, the members of our evolutionary tree. And in us, the first molar starts to grow in the womb, and it erupts around the age of 6 years old. We call it our 6-year molar often. Okay, so the first molar erupts around 6 years of age. But 1 million years ago, in fossil ancestors of Homo erectus and other fossil species at that time, the first molar erupted at around the age of 4 years of age. So it was a faster pace of growing up than what we have. And so the further back in time you go, the faster the eruption of the teeth and the growth of the teeth took place. And so the last 1 million years is when the slowing down, the real slowing down of growth occurred in our lineage, in our evolutionary lineage. And so I ask you, what you might recall about the past 1 million years? And you may recall from an earlier slide that this is the time period where fossil brain cases show the most rapid increase in the size of the brain case compared with the body, the last 1 million years. And so the expansion of the brain, that amazingly expensive, energetically expensive brain, and the slowing down of body growth based on these studies were in lockstep with one another. And so if big brains and growing slowly were developing around the same time, what else do you think would be important? Well, getting energy to support that large brain, okay, and slowing down the amount of growth at the same time, the pace of growth at the same time. So getting energy and nutritious food, also protecting the young as they're immature for a longer period of time, both would have been critical. Beginning around 1 million years ago, but especially at around 800,000 years ago in a series of hearths, of fireplaces that have been recorded at a site in Israel, that there is evidence of this, the cooking of food and the control of fire that would have been important around this time. The release of lots of nutrients and energy due to cooking. We also find evidence of durable shelters during this particular time. And this happens to be one site that's been well studied from France, the south of France. This is a reconstruction of the building of a hut. There are post holes all around in the sediments and evidence of the stone tools and even a little small fire inside of the structure and very few things on the outside of where the post holes were. And so this is understood to be one of the earliest clear evidences of a durable hut or a durable shelter on the ground that was built. This combination of larger brain, shelters, cooking food, slowing down the pace of growth, and of course, parenting and intense nurturing of young all make sense together as a real milestone in becoming human, the emergence of features that lie near the heart of people's experiences today. Let me go a little bit more quickly to this third vignette, although it's really interesting. And this takes us back to where I worked for those many years, this site in southern Kenya. And in excavations, quite a number of excavations like this that you see here along this hillside, that we have found some very interesting things with the research team that was assembled about 25 years ago. And what we see at this site of Olorgesailie, it's one of the most famous sites in the world for stone hand axes, layer after layer of stone hand axes from more than 1 million years ago up to about 500,000, 500,000 years ago. I mean, 700,000 years of, basically the same technology. I mean, I don't even know what version of Windows I should be using. And I remember slide rules, which my nieces the other day said, "What are those?" Maybe some of you don't. In any case, but the same technology essentially for such a long period of time. But later in time, beginning 320,000 years ago, hand axes are completely gone from this part of East Africa. And it's replaced by this smaller and more diverse and more mobile technology. You can compare the scales there. It's a smaller kind of technology. And there is also that right there is those two objects up at the top, just blown up a little ways to show that they refit. And some of the innovations in technology included what I call stone tool chess. You take this very, very, very fine rock and you chip it in a way so that with one blow of a hammerstone or maybe a piece of wood, you can knock off repeatedly these triangular pieces of stone that are really small. And these show damage at the tips, the ones that we've been able to recover. And these we think are quite sure are projectile points. These are things that can fly easily through the air. And the world's never been the same since. And so this is just one of the technology results that occur beginning about 320,000 years ago. But wait, there's more. That there is this black rock that I've mentioned, and it's obsidian. And obsidian is the sharpest known substance when flake. It's incredibly sharp. In fact, surgeons will sometimes, if they're not using lasers, will use obsidian rather than a steel scalpel, steel implements to do very, very fine surgeries. It's very sharp. And so, but obsidian does not occur in this area of the Rift Valley. And so what we have found is that the obsidian occurs from 8 different directions, up to 60 to 80 miles away. Again, different directions. So we think that this is part of trade, that this is one of the earliest instances we can say, these early humans, probably members of our species, because it's around the time of the earliest fossil record of our species, that there was trade going on and perhaps a social network of trading of this obsidian around this part of the Rift Valley. And there's even more. From these same archaeological digs, we also find in East Africa the oldest use of pigments, the gathering of coloring material. Here showing 2 pieces of ochre, of orange and red ochre, but also black manganese rock that do not come from the area, the region of southern Kenya, but were brought in to these archaeological sites and gathered at these places. And the importance of pigments is that coloring material is often seen as the root of a complex symbolic behavior. Just think of all the ways we use color in flags and uniforms and all sorts of ways in which we show national to ethnic identity, cosmetics and whatever. And so the use of color here is also quite important, perhaps would have been important with these trading networks as well. And so from that point onward, from 320,000 years onward, not only in our digs, but around East Africa, we find in the archaeological record clues for increasing innovation, for even wider social networks, extending hundreds and hundreds of miles by about 100,000 years ago, and evidence of complex symbolic activity that must have required language in the way that human languages are today, and complex thinking and planning. All things that we have found in evidence in now throughout Africa, right around the time of the oldest fossil skulls and fossilized bones that are members of our species. So let's just for a moment turn back to the coloring material. And this just shows one of our excavations where the material was coming out of. And these give you some examples of color as the foundation of complex language, art, and other symbolic behavior. We have, again, up at the upper left, those ochre crayons that come from southern Africa. We also have that same image of representational art from Africa. We have over from Germany, dated to about 40 to 42,000 years ago, some incredible statues. What's called the Lion Man, which represents, who knows what it represents, has the head of a lion, but it's standing bipedally. Not necessarily a man, but nonetheless, it's this chimera in a sense, this mixture. Just amazing imagination. In the bottom right, we have from the same cave system, again back to about 42,000 years ago, the world's, I would think still the world's oldest clear musical instrument. It's pieces of swan bone and sometimes mammoth ivory that were adhered together and with holes in them. And a reconstruction of this made out of other material shows that it played a pentatonic scale, a 5-note scale, not a 7-note scale like in Western music today, but a 5-note scale, which is the scale of music that is followed in pretty much all ethnographic music in today's world and in historic times. And so it played a 5-note scale. We have burials, of course, with tremendous use of coloring material sprinkled over bodies. In this particular case, not the oldest one. The oldest burial that has ochre in it is over 100,000 years old from a site in Israel. This is a site that's closer in age to about 24,000 years, but it's a remarkable burial from double burial of 2 children where the skeletons were found head to head and sprinkled with ochre pigment and shells, 10,000 shells all around the bodies that suggests that there were shell beads that had been placed on the clothing of these children when they were buried. And then in the middle there's one of my favorite stories of representational cave art. It's a cave called Chauvet Cave. Some of you may have heard of it, Chauvet Cave in France. And it's deep inside this, this cave, very deep, very, very dark place. And the archaeologists who found this, including a colleague of mine leading the expedition, Jean-Claude, when they went in there said, we don't know what to make of these. You can actually perhaps see that there's this overprinting of lion shapes on the right side of it, kind of like a series of them. And then over on the left side, you can see up sort of top, there's a woolly rhino that looks like it's been double minted there. So they had their flashlights and they didn't quite know what to make of this, but the local politicians quickly learned that there was something going on and wanted to see what was going on in the cave. What was the new discovery? And so Jean-Claude said, let's give them a real Stone Age experience. And they had flickering torches. They lit and they went deep inside the cave, all very mysterious. And in the flickering light, they move. The lion prances across the wall and the woolly rhino shakes back and forth. It's the first animation. I mean, absolutely astonishing. I mean, it gives me chills to think about that. 32,000 years ago, they were us. But just a remarkable find. And so I think that these kinds of finds speak to the dawn of our creative minds, the roots of our imagination, including wondering about things that we cannot see in our immediate presence. And these finds, I think, are also part of our own yearning to understand what it means to be human. So let me conclude by looking at this overview, a very simplified view of the tree of ancestors and cousins deep into our past. What we have here is a timeline on the left, 6 million years, and these circles represent many of the species that are widely recognized by scientists as having lived in the past from 6 million years ago to near the present and us in the present. The different groups within that are all bipedal, all had small canine teeth in males and females, characteristics of our own evolutionary tree. And I think some of the discoveries that we've looked at here tonight lead to some interesting and thoughtful conclusions. I'd like to just summarize with some of those. Humanity, you and I and everyone on Earth are part of an immense genealogy, this tree of kinship. And it's not a straight line. It's never been a straight line, but a diverse and branching evolutionary tree like that of most other organisms that we know of. Our species is part of an intimately related array of human-like species, and all of these evolutionary ancestors and cousins of ours possess some union of the features that distinguish humans today: complex social lives, intelligence, complex emotions, a deft ability to manipulate things, among other elements that we typically assign and restrict specifically to ourselves. And yet we've also seen that many of the things that are at the heart of the human experience emerged well before our own species came on the scene. Our timeline of origins known so far suggests far deeper roots than we ever imagined concerning, for instance, the sharing of food with one another, showing care for the elderly and infirm, the slowing of the pace of growth in infants and children, which called upon the constant parental energies and devotion of the caretakers, and all before our own species emerged from our now extinct relatives. Another important point, I think, is that out of this diversity of species that are recognized, we're the only ones left. I like to think of us, I'm not sure I like to think of us, but I do think of us as the last biped standing. All of the other ways of life represented by these ancestors and cousins of ours are no longer present on Earth. And I think that gives us something pretty profound to think about as it draws attention to the fragile nature of life, even in our own immense journey through time. And finally, all people on the planet today share a 6 million year heritage of becoming human, a history that's shared, that's immensely deeper than the shorter blips, very short blips of time in which our divisions have been built up. And from this standpoint, what we share, the commonalities of the human condition, make pale in comparison the recent history, sometimes measured in decades, sometimes only in a few years, over which our perceived differences and conflicts have arisen. And I think that this is one of the most significant perspectives to come away from the study of human evolution. So these are just some of the ideas from the ever-growing body of research that I believe can articulate with what we think about being human, including relevance to seminary study and religious understandings. So I hope I've interested you in some of the themes that you can see in the exhibit Exploring Human Origins. I do want to draw attention to one final message that's there in the exhibit, but I want to draw attention to it here. That echoes, some of our thinking about this question: what does it mean to be human? And that it's this: that research has made discoveries about the origin of many of the features that distinguish our kind, Homo sapiens, from other forms of life. Yet the ways in which people, all of us, understand the word human, including by the variety of things you see in these images, the ways in which we understand the word human and how we think about ourselves are far broader than what research on human evolution can study. And so the exhibit is an invitation to you to consider how research findings on human origins and the things that we really do care about can be brought together to enrich how we think about our shared humanity. Thank you very much. Okay, questions? Yes, please.
I was especially intrigued by your remarks about development of complex symbology and that representational cave art and so forth.
Mm.
And I'm wondering, is there any sense of a motive for such creation? Is it the beginning of just free expression, art for art's sake, or is there some lineage, ritual, or something else that
Yeah,
your
that's-
research has
that's
uncovered?
Yeah, such a good question. It's very interesting is that a number of years ago, someone had pointed out that the American archaeologists tend to interpret it that there's something about economy that is in this. The British tend to see it as social class, and the French tend to think of it as sex. So, eye of the beholder, perhaps, but it's such an important question. And I think that the most universal answer to my way of thinking is that it's telling of stories, and just a recognition of even in dark, mysterious places that you can bring things together that are about the outside world. As I said, things that are invisible to us, that we can't quite see in our immediate surroundings, and create a narrative about it that's meaningful and easily parable. And I think that there's something in all of the various forms of cave art. Some of the earliest ones, the earliest cave art that is now known, is published in January, is from the island of Sulawesi in Indonesia. And it's a series of handprints and a few blotches on the wall that do look like some kind of organism. And that's dated back to about 68,000 years ago. And there's also another from another cave on the same island of Sulawesi, about, I think it's 44,000 years ago, 45,000 years ago, of a mural, a hunting mural. And that's clearly, the hunting wasn't going on in the cave. It was saying, this is what happened. Let's have a memory of this. And I think it could be a way of extending human memory in ways that are meaningful. That's the best I got. Yes, please.
I have a question. You've mentioned a lot of positive traits of humans that have led to evolution. But at the same time, humans have the capacity to do a lot of negative things. For example, you showed some ancient hominids that had killed an elephant for meat. Yet today, we might kill that same elephant for profit from the ivory, or to have a head to hang over the fireplace.
Yeah.
How do these traits of human beings, what effect do they have on future evolution?
Ooh, wow, that's a powerful question. I wish I had the ability to see into the future. That's one of the most difficult things about evolution. It's so conditional. But the point is such an important one too, because one of the things that has come about in my own research is this question about how did adaptability emerge. And one of the ways in which adaptability emerged is that very early on, if you just think about taking a stone and modifying it, is that we adapt to the world by altering our surroundings. The control of fire is an alteration of the environment. The simple planting of a seed or tending to an animal or a herd of animals may have had very simple beginnings, but they're ways of altering our immediate surroundings. And it became a way of life that was so critical to what ended up being us, Homo sapiens, that we can't get away from altering the world. And it became so successful that it spread worldwide, which means it's, for want of a better word, it's global change. It's global alteration. And so given the populations that we have been able to have on the world today, the burden of altering the world is now in a totally new place. And so it may take even things that were positive, they were advantageous. Yes, there were disadvantages to them for sure, but things that were okay long ago, but now in the present day, in the sense of one of the characteristics of being human is that we survive by altering the world. And that this has an immense impact on the world. It certainly is having an immense impact, not only potentially on our evolutionary history, but the evolutionary histories of all organisms. Maybe not the most microscopic, although it does on them too, because of our ability to create technologies, immunological technologies and medicines that can alter the evolutionary histories of the microbes as well. So it's we now live in a much more complicated world than the Pleistocene and the Stone Age. With regard to matters of the future evolution, one of the characteristics of any evolutionary history is the diversification in the different species. Now, we're all one species worldwide today. But if we begin to, I don't mean this in a sort of Star Trek sort of way, but begin to colonize other planets, that would be certainly a motivator of division in ways that would, lead to different kinds of humanity in a sense. So one could speculate about that. It's really hard to know, but it's such an interesting question to. I wish we could just sort of sit around and sort of talk. Yeah. Yes, please.
So tools become weapons at some point and need to kill animals, but when is there evidence of weapons being used against other
Other humans? Yeah. The history of warfare is surprisingly short archaeologically. When I was growing up and first getting in, my brain was still growing, and I started to get interested actually in this field at a very young age. And there was a book that was one of the bestsellers of the 1960s called African Genesis by a playwright named Robert Ardrey. And the first line in the book I remember so clearly is, "Not in innocence and not in Asia was mankind born." And basically he was promulgating a view that human beings had emerged from killer apes dating way back millions of years, that had, to use the words of one of his inspirers of this idea, this thesis, Raymond Dart, a South African anatomist, that the early humans slaked their flesh slaked their thirst on the ravenous flesh of organ. It just went off. We think some of today's social media is bad. In any case, that was written down. And Ardrey, promulgated this idea that really caught the American public and the Western public by storm, that we were originally evil to begin with. But it turns out that when you actually look at the evidence, that the earliest evidence for one group of people actually using weapons of death on another population was more like 12,000 to 15,000 years ago. There were people who were us, people who were essentially in situations of environmental stress, food stress, and they did raids. And raids are common, and they became armies and then nation states and so on. So really the history of warfare as we know it is a much more recent kind of thing. The earliest evidence of possible death by trauma is about 400,000 years ago in one of the ancestors or one of the early Neanderthals, where there is a compressed fracture on the left side of the skull, probably perhaps by a right-handed person, where there is a club or something that would have made that indentation. But that's a one-off. There's nothing like the killing fields or anything like that prior to a relatively recent period of time compared with what we're talking about here. Yes, please.
I'm a historian, and I get really fascinated by hearing how we refer to color has changed over time, how the words we use and even what we mean when we say what is blue, or we even have a word for it and things like that. Yeah. When you look at ochre and the pigments that are being traded and circulated, I mean, is it even possible archaeologically to infer, in the use of, say, ochre in a burial? Is the pigment saying this is a different state? Like, do we have any sort of sense of what is being like conceptually signified by pigments, sort of ceremonies and things like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's about the use of pigment and what it signifies to the people using it. Certainly, there is a very thin line, and a line that one could argue about where to draw between commemoration and ritual of commemoration on the one hand, and a sense of this represents something sacred. And I don't know exactly where to draw the line in terms of the archaeological evidence, but again, another interesting and important question. How could I forget you?
I was wondering what was special about the conditions in East Africa that led to our early human ancestors coming about, and do you think it could have happened anywhere else, and would we have turned out completely different if we had evolved somewhere else?
Yeah, boy, that's a good one. How many hours do we have? Yeah, what was special about East Africa? For one thing, it's preservation. The Rift Valley is a place where underneath the Earth's crust, the Earth's mantle circulates, and it happens to be a place where the circulation is like this. And so the Earth's crust above it gets stretched, and it got stretched. That stretching began to be very, very obvious around 24, some people would put it back to 30 million years ago. And by virtue of stretching, it then began to fracture, especially when there was doming up of the magma beneath the Earth's crust and the volcanic material beneath the Earth's crust, what's called doming. So stretching and doming led to geology lesson, folks. Yeah, how'd you know? This fracturing of it. And so with the formation of this deeper and deeper valley, they became places, there were basins all over the basins, true sedimentary basins where the sediment piled up and could preserve things. And so it's also a very dynamic place. So there's not only burying of place, but as I often will say, the plains were made rough places. That there was uplift due to earthquake activity, and there was exposure and erosion of those long buried areas where you can actually go out and find fossils and know where to dig. So nature does the first excavation, so it's preservation first of all. There's another thing about Eastern Africa, though, in general, that's interesting, and I'm exploring this in actually a paper that's developing right now, that if you look at climate models over the last millions of years, from West Africa to East Africa, that it is certainly true that West Africa, Central Africa, all the way over to the Rift Valley is wet. It just tends to stay wet over millions of years. And in the eastern part, it's drier. But when it's drier, it also means that the increases due to changes in Earth's rotation and orbit around the sun, that there are times that are very wet and times that are very dry. And when you take the very dry environment baseline and you create wetness, it then creates a great deal of fluctuation of environment. And you have what I think is a real driver of evolution, which is the fluctuation of environments. If you keep changing the name of the game, trying to run to just keep in place, this stay to persist, is part of the process of evolution. So I think it's a combination of where it's the only place in the world where there's that continental difference, plus you happen to have, ending up in Africa, the evolutionary baseline of our closest living biological relatives. And out of that group, we are part of, humanity emerged. So that was a really quick answer to a conflict. But yes, please.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, of course.
At what point in evolutionary history has there been any evidence of religious ceremonies or things of that nature?
Yeah, evidence of religious ceremonies. One of the things that, very, very famous, in fact, one of the things on the display table in my office, perhaps you noticed, what's been called the cult of, the religion of the Venus figurines. And these are a series of figurines that were made over a wide swath of Europe. And they were made for, I think it's something like 5,000 to 7,000 years, suggesting a strong tradition of worship, or at least acknowledging in a sacred way the female body, and that could have some religious significance. You know, one of the things that I remember a colleague of mine, a Spanish colleague of mine, said that he had found in a cave site dating back to 900,000 years ago. 900,000 years ago, he found this hand axe, stone hand axe that was not made from local rock. And he said, this is the beginning of religion. And I asked, what do you mean? And he said, well, it's clearly a ritual practice. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, it's so unusual. And I said, but a ritual is something that's practiced over and over again. So how can it be a ritual? It's only one. And so he went, yeah. Said more than that, but not for that. In any case, these are hard questions, really good questions though. So keep asking them. But I would say that something that is clearly recognizable as religion is tens of thousands of years old. And it's due to the repeated sense that there is some sacred object being made. Now, another thing that enters into this is burial and the ritual of burial. And the question is, so for example, in the Shanidar cave, where I mentioned that the individual with the damaged brain case, but who grew up, who grew to an elderly age for his time, that there is another burial inside that cave that it's a bit controversial, but there is evidence underneath the body of evergreen leaves, microscopic evidence of evergreens that were laid like a bed. And also there is the pollen just in that place underneath the body of 7 different kinds of colorful flowers. So what does that represent? The controversial part of it said, oh, maybe the pollen got in some other way, but if you read this paper that laid this out in the journal Science, it's very clear. It's underneath the body. It's mixed in with the evergreen boughs, what would have been, branches of evergreens. And, I think that there could even be in a related species to ourselves, a sense of reverence. It may be different from religion, but I think we might be able to identify aspects of reverence. And I think burials